Bon dia, benvinguts. Moltes gràcies per acompanyar-nos en aquesta magnífica presentació de dos meravellosos llibres, dels quals ara ens parlaran els seus autors. Per cert, són els primers convidats transatlàntics que tenim des de fa molts de mesos i això ens alegra. Els dos llibres que avui ens presentaran són Accidental Masterpiece i The Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe, 100 Texts since 1929. Són dos llibres independents però que estan connectats i que tenen a veure amb la recerca infinita, jo diria, que el professor Neumann i ara també en Caralt fan sobre el pavelló Mies. Després tindrem una oportunitat, ara ens faran una presentació ells dos i després tindrem oportunitat de compartir amb ells, però una no deixa de preguntar-se si és infinita el potencial de recerca que té aquest espai, si la recerca s'acaba. La resposta és no, segurament, sempre canviem nosaltres i per tant canvien les percepcions de les coses que veiem. Us presento els nostres convidats. Dietrich Neumann és professor de Història d'Arquitectura Moderna i director d'Estudis Urbans a Brown University, USA. Dietrich, please, we're very happy to have you. Thank you. I Caralt, arquitecte, historiador, professor i director de l'Escola d'Arquitectura de la Universitat San Sebastián de Chile. David, moltes gràcies per acompanyar-nos. So the presentations have been done, and now the floor is yours. So please. You can remove your mask for speaking. Yes.
Oh, good. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. I wanted to begin with a word of thanks to Ana Ramos and Ivan Blasi and everyone here at the Mies van der Rohe Foundation for hosting us and for organizing this and for keeping this pavilion constantly active and in the news and such a lively place. I wanted to thank my friend and collaborator David Caralt over here for the great collaboration, and my sister Elizabeth for the enormous amount of proofreading that she did on the volume. So it was really a great collaboration in many ways. We thought we would talk a little bit about the research on the book and how a building that was so immensely impactful, perhaps the most impactful building of the 20th century, how it came about. And perhaps we'll go to the next image. And it is always a complicated story. And this complexity is also reflected in the change of title. David put up the old title. It was originally called Architecture and Politics. And then the publisher said, it's not going to sell. That name is not good for making the book, appealing to everyone. So we called it Accidental Masterpiece, which I think is also a good title because it is almost contradictory. Usually masterpieces aren't accidental, but I think so many different things had to come together to help this building emerge at a certain point in time. And I wanted to just very quickly talk about that for a moment. Here's the building as we all know it in this wonderful photographs, and we all know it as a work of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, but if there hadn't been many other key figures, the building would not exist. So Mies, obviously, as the designer. Next, we have a lot of quick images. So Mies as the designer working, of course, with his partner Lily Reich, but it's also important to know that a man called Georg von Schnitzler, whom you see here, the German commissary of the German exhibition, selected Mies and pushed the pavilion through against the wishes of the German government that wanted to save money and didn't want a pavilion. And he said, no, we'll have a pavilion. And he paid for most of it out of his pocket. It's very important to know. His wife, Lily von Schnitzler, made a lot of diplomatic efforts. She was probably the one who suggested Mies. She was more in tune with the architectural scene of the time. And she also was close friends with Marquès de Foronda, the local organizer here in Barcelona who was in charge of the World's Fair. And because of her contacts, she actually allowed this spot, which was empty at the time, to be given to the Germans for this pavilion. It was meant to be around the corner in a little tiny corner on the next plaza over, and this allowed this design that they got this piece of land very late in the game, allowed the pavilion to emerge. So it was the Marqués de Foronda, and then, of course, the Germans ran out of money. There was a stop. The building was abandoned. Nothing was going to happen. And the Spanish dictator, Primo de Rivera, stepped in, wrote to the German government and said, I want this building built. So without Primo de Rivera, the proto-fascist dictator, it also might not have come to pass. And then Gustav Stresemann, the German foreign minister, he gathered money and found more money, and the building could go forward. And then, of course, as the last one, this is a funny self-portrait of a man called Sasha Stone, who, after Mies had left, came here and took the photographs of the building. And without his photographs, the building, of course, was dismantled. Without his photographs, I think perhaps the desire to rebuild it would not have been as strong. His photographs were so masterful, as you can see here. So these are all contributors to the story and to the existence of the building. And as I said in the beginning, I just wanted to mention one more of our findings in the books. Money ran out, as I said, in the middle, and the building was officially abandoned. The government said, no, we're not going to build a pavilion. And then it took 16 days until the money was found and it could move forward. It meant that at the end of March 1929, there was nothing here. The opening was exactly 8 weeks later. So the whole building was built in 8 weeks, completely unprecedented and put together very, very in great haste and very quickly. And I wonder sometimes if the fact that the German information section, next one please, which ended up in a really awkward position on the balcony of the machinery hall. Next one, please. Here you see it. If that wasn't meant to be here, we don't know. There's no correspondence about it, but most critics talk about the fact that the pavilion was deliberately left empty. I'm not sure if that is really true, because it was done in such haste. Perhaps there was just a decision to just build the building, just to keep the time frame and be done with it. So just a few of many findings that we hope adds to the complexity. And one last thing before I hand it over to David is, of course, that Georg von Schnitzler was very conservative. And this is the moment when modern architecture, which had for a long time been associated with left-wing socialist politics, now becomes accessible and acceptable to the right, to conservative people, and that is how it often would spread without its sort of social drive that was there in the beginning. When it comes to America, no one really connects to that initial revolutionary fervor that had accompanied it, and in the case of Georg von Schnitzler, he actually joined the Nazi Party a few years after sponsoring the pavilion and was tried in the Nuremberg trials in 1947. So the story is very, very complex in many ways. Next one, please. And I hand it over to David to talk about another finding that we are very happy with.
Many thanks, Dietrich. Many thanks to Anna, to Ivan. Estic molt content, estic realment molt content de poder fer aquesta presentació. Seguirem per no interrompre, però molt feliç de veure'ls tants amics i de tornar a casa. About the photographs, yes. First, we open with a question that's: has any set of photographs ever played a more central role in a building's history than the 13 famous images, the canonical photographs of the pavilion taken by Sasha Stone in late June 1929? The second point is the limitation at that time to take official photographs in the exhibition grounds. It was necessary to have an official certification by the organizers and with a high cost. And that's what can explain the few number of photos of official photographs, not amateur. There are a little group of amateur photos also. And by the other hand, it is very important to say that Mies not arranged a photographer to document the building. He was clearly not aware of the prominent role it could play in the future. We think it's a key point in the history of the building. The photographs were commissioned to such stone by a manager in the German silk industry to photograph the silk section, and the rest of the exhibits show another stroke of luck for Mies, we think, another accidental point in the history of the building. The power of the visual coherence and single-mindedness of Stone's vision prepared the ground for the mythical stature of the building, and thus such a stone became the unexpected and most important partner of Mies and Reich for the building. So in these photographs, we knew, thanks to an anonymous English journalist and archive documents, that the letters Alemania were applied in the pavilion in the second week of October in 1929, just in time for the German week. The letters were applied in the corner of the podium next to stairs there, and they were also in the back entrance, as we can see in another photo by Foundation in the archives of the Foundation Mies van der Rohe. The typography was designed by Gerhard Severin and was present in all the German sections. We know, thanks to that journalist, an article in the Spectator journal, that sometimes they were in red color in the sections. Severin also designed the official catalog of the German section, where one can find inside a tourist advertisement of Alemania with the same black letters that were here in the building. By accident, again, we found a photograph that showed the black letters inside a graphic supplement of the newspaper La Vanguardia, published in October 24. The photograph is there, exactly, Colección Particular Mine collection, but it's available for everywhere. Until then, only the letters of marble suppliers Kostner and Gottschalk were installed in the podium, as we see in some photos of the opening, but not in the photographs by Stone. As you know, these are two books. This is the second one, beautiful book. A history of the building's reception, the Barcelona Pavilion, 100 texts since 1929. This book presents 100 selected texts, from the opening speeches to newspaper articles and private letters, not only from architects and critics, but also by writers, journalists, artists, some of them unpublished. So it presents a rich mix of people looking at first the building in 1929, then since 1930, looking at the photograph of the building, and at last, since the last 80s, the reconstruction of the building. This book admits a different approach, in the sense that can be read freely from any page one takes, depending on their own interest. One can see then an amazing wide range of opinions on the same building. So it's surprising how many glances this building can admit as a sort of mirror of oneself. We believe that this book is also a contribution in the framework of the reception histories, because buildings have been approached normally in terms of their patrons, clients, architectural authors, and design concepts before and during the construction, once completed the issue of their relation to the society or to the people who use them receive normally less recognition. So here we put a sort of map of words and concepts during the time since 1929 until 2018. one can find the critical reports, opinions, and so on. The post-war debates, the 60s and the 70s, the postmodern critics also, the hot debates on the reconstruction in the 80s and 90s. Until now, one can see this sort of maps of words. Please, if you want to.
You want to do the Ai Weiwei? Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
you know,
you know.
So on the next, I think it's you called it so well a map, which is wonderful. So the discourse on the building is something that constantly evolves and changes, which is really fascinating for us over the last 90 years. And you wrote down all the different terms, and the interpretations of this are so wide-ranging. Is it the Holy Grail? Is it a reference to an aquarium? Is it flowing space? Is it still? Is it about stillness? You know, there are many, many different interpretations, which is wonderful for us. And you, David, pointed out that now that we have this book, you can make wonderful cross-connections from, this is an article that David discovered in the next image, where, for instance, Josep Maria de Sagara says, there are two large pools of moribund liquid, a water that looks like a softened glass full of invisible larvae. He was a surrealist, friend of Dali's, of course. And then you have Ai Weiwei come here and, in a way, demonstrate the sort of organic nature of any liquid that is here. And the fact that there's no moss in the pool is, of course, the result of lots of chemicals and constant caretaking. And he poured coffee here to show what would happen if this was really an organic liquid, as water usually is, or coffee is. And you have here the Labyrinths of Science by Tafuri, also already anticipated in 1930. So I wanted to maybe come to an end with our sort of last quick example of that we wanted to show. Here's Ai Weiwei standing right here, the Chinese artist pouring coffee powder into the pool, and they had a big truck. It's kind of sad for all the milk that was spilled, but they had a whole truck that filled the pool with milk. There's a wonderful film online on your wonderful website to demonstrate this sort of changing nature of organic material. And maybe one last point before we can bring it to discussion. So here's that photo again by Sasha Stone, and as you see, no inscription on the facade, because he took all his photos before the inscription was put up much later. And I think it was held back because Mr. von Schnitzler had paid for the whole thing. He couldn't call it the von Schnitzler Pavilion. And so Alemannia wasn't put on either, but finally for the German week, he put it on. But I wanted to point out one more thing that we learned from the text, which is about the flags. We had always assumed that there was a Spanish flag and a German flag. And then in one of the texts, a critic at the time said there were the two German flags. And we had to research that, and I suddenly realized that in the Weimar Republic, there was a new flag for the Democratic Republic of Weimar Germany that was introduced in 1919, and many conservative people hated that new flag. They wanted the old flag of the old empire that had gone down in the First World War, which was black, white, and red. And those were the two flags outside of the pavilion to appease both the conservatives, some of them living here in Barcelona, and the New Democrats. So on either side of the pavilion, we had those two flags. I'm not very good at Photoshop, as you can see, but I put it in there, and you see this is what it actually looked like. And here's another view of the German and the both German flags, the democratic and the old monarchy flag. And I couldn't help myself. I had to throw in the little lettering there that we hope with Ivan's help we can hopefully establish this as an installation at the pavilion, which will be somewhat controversial because now, here's that great photo that you found, which I love, is one of the, who is the author again, David? The photographer?
Gabriel Casas.
Yes, fantastic photo, very modernistic, right? And you see the old German flag in the distance, and we hope to have a installation here, but it will be a bit controversial because now in Germany there's a right-wing movement and they have appropriated the old flag again for their purposes. I have just a quick image there on the right. There they are trying to storm the Reichstag. So putting these two flags up here will ruffle some feathers, but I think it helps to show the complexity around the pavilion. And so in summary, David put up this wonderful quote here by Raphael Moneo. The pavilion is a mirror or a kaleidoscope in which the viewer, the interpreter, the critic is the new protagonist. And I love this photo that Thomas Ruff, German photographer, took of the pavilion, because it shows that the pavilion and its meaning, it's not precise. It's actually always shifting and changing and somewhat blurry. Meaning is never stable. It always changes, and I think this shows that very well. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, you two, for the amazing research that you are endlessly conducting, and for the nice books and super well presented, I have to say. I mean, the objects are great, like the choice of the images, the letters, everything is super, but what's written there is really even better. This is a story about that Sasha Stone. I mean, the photos were not chosen by Mies, and that's really
important.
Many lines will have to be rewritten, right? Because we have all heard so much about what did Mies wanted to show with this photo or with this other one, or why did he not take a photo of this side or the other side. So all that, you're opening new lights to reinterpret or rewrite many of the understandings of the pavilion, which is obviously in constant evolution, as it's clear. I mean, yeah, my question at the beginning is, are we ever going to know the whole thing? Do you think, Dietrich?
Hopefully not. I think, as we both sort of believe, every generation asks new questions and creates new meanings. The meaning is never stable. It will continue to evolve, and questions that will seem obvious in a few years are questions we don't even think of today. So I think it is a constant process. History is always written for and by the present.
Yeah, and precisely because of that, yeah, we've been a long time talking about this, let's say, deepening in the historical reproduction of the pavilion by this idea of putting back the letters and the flags and bringing it back to its, not only the architectural concept, but the pure historic reality. So even having it much more like a reconstruction of the existing thing and not only the concept. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's always interesting when I hear your lectures and read your books and the context of the politics at that time, and whenever we think of what happened to all those people short years after. And it might be controversial to bring the flags back, but we're not very much afraid of controversy since we have reasons for do things. And having our society aware of the dangers of repeating history is always worthy. So it doesn't matter how controversial it might be. I also like very much all these, and this maybe goes to David, all this collection of voices that have spoken about the pavilion, and that collection of the mapping of words that you created, and how is it evolution? So, David, what was the most impressing, or what was the quote that you liked most from the ones you have collected?
Yeah, about it, my answer will be in Catalan or Spanish. And also about your first question. I need to speak a little bit in Catalan, please. Mm-hmm. Una de les coses més maques, més interessants, trobo del llibre dels textos és, a mi m'interessa, els comentaris de persones que no són arquitectes. Periodistes, visitants ocasionals. Què veuen ells, escriptors com en Segarra, què veuen ells en aquest edifici? I el que m'ha sorprès és veure que hi ha una mena d'eco amb algunes coses dels crítics contemporanis d'ara, no? Que es poden establir alguns ponts o algunes connexions, malgrat que és un edifici que és pràcticament igual el que van conèixer els visitants del 29, però veure escoltar, llegir un ull que no està viciat, per dir-ho així, amb alguns artistes que també venen sense cap prejudici, com Ai Weiwei i altres, i establir aquesta mena de ponts entre uns i altres em sembla que és molt potent i també bonic, no? Que l'edifici pot arribar a admetre tanta quantitat de punts de vista diferents que van canviant en el temps, però que també es poden establir al mateix temps hi ha extrems, però al mateix temps hi ha punts de connexió. Penso que això està aquí i em sembla que parla de que l'edifici també està obert i disponible, afortunadament, per les properes generacions, per nosaltres, esclar, ara, i pels que vinguin després, no?
Sí, certament les interpretacions dels artistes, nosaltres a l'equip, a l'Ivan, a mi, a tots els que treballem, és molt inspirador perquè arriben sense els prejudicis dels arquitectes o sense el coneixement previ dels arquitectes i sovint venen com molt més lliures i els fa més radicals en les seves intervencions.
I perdona, i una altra cosa que els hi cridava molt l'atenció a les persones que no eren arquitectes era l'escultura de Kolbe al pati interior. Entraven aquí i aquest era el seu espai preferit. Aquest era un espai màgic que ells d'alguna manera podien comprendre també i podien establir una relació entre una escultura figurativa i un espai abstracte. The contrast between the sculpture and abstract, the space, this empty space. So it was common in the visitors that were not architects. It's beautiful, nice, I think.
Yeah, and it's very nice that there are some of the local interpretations at the time, because we for a long time we were kind of lacking of many connections with the local interpretations, and you have provided some that were known and others that were less known. Also the voices of women. You have included a number of women's voices talking about the pavilion, which is not that common. Mostly it has been men who has been spoken about it. And I very much like, for instance, Miss Lily Schnitzler, that she's always mentioning both Ludwig and Lily Reich whenever she speaks about the pavilion. And that's very useful for women generations later. Yeah. So I think that's very nice that you made this effort, because I'm sure that it was not that evident. You had to search more, maybe. Was it? You had to search more to find the women's quotes, or they were already there?
Well, I think, whenever we found one, it was welcome to finally add one to the mix. One has to really look for them, but clearly, that's still something that is also in evolution, right? To include more diverse voices in the critical reception. That's something we're very interested in. Yeah. I wanted to throw in another, we just joked about it. The project started when we had a coffee in the Plaza Filippo Neri downtown, and yesterday we met there again to just celebrate that we had come full circle, and we were talking about all the many accidents that made the pavilion happen and become this masterpiece. And one, since we talked about the Kolbe sculpture, Mies was in a very rush. He was briefly in Berlin, and he needed a sculpture, and he wanted Lehmbruck, who was a German sculptor who had actually died, but he wanted one of his. He couldn't get it, so he took a taxi and went to see Mr. Georg Kolbe, and he had a papier-mâché copy of a sculpture he had made. So Mies took the papier-mâché and had it sent to Barcelona, but it was very fragile, and he was lucky that it arrived in one piece, because on the way back, transported back, it was completely destroyed. So that could have happened on the way here, and then we wouldn't have this Kolbe, right? So it was just so many things that fell into place that we are just lucky that this all happened and became such an amazing masterpiece. So.
And there is also a coincidence I love, because these two books also have been accidental, in the sense that, if I can explain, it has to be published in Princeton for the first time, and the editor, we don't know what happened there. Finally, Dietrich take them to Birkhauser, and fortunately, finally, were published two books. And I think it's also an accidental microhistory in the research.
Much better. It would have been so thick with Princeton, and the editor was very slow, and I thought, no, let's do it with them. Much better.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point, exactly.
That's super. That's super to know all the insights of the story. I would now give the floor to anyone in the audience who would like to make some questions to the author or to the authors. I see here professors, researchers, Mies lovers. So who would like to break the ice?
Thank you very much. I'm not an architect myself, but I'm very fond of architecture. I love architecture. And after all you have said, I must say that just thinking about the beauty of this building, I think it's something that will remain super classic forever. I mean, the simplicity of the colors and the shape make of it something that will be admirable forever. And I think that the research will never end. No, thank you very much. That's a little comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I agree. And we have a chapter in the book that looks at the echo of the pavilion over time. And there are buildings in the 40s that look like the Barcelona Pavilion by Richard Neutra in California. The buildings of the 60s, also in California, that quote this building. You can go all the way to the year 2020, and you see buildings in Australia or in California or anywhere that clearly take inspiration or pay homage to this building. Another one in Greece, which I love, 1961 by an architect outside of Athens, is an homage to the Barcelona Pavilion. The whole century refers back, and it's still as modern and contemporary today as it was almost 100 years ago.
What I in fact expecting to find is that I was thinking about that in fact the most maybe important accidental circumstance of the pavilion is that it was forced to disappear because of the economic issue. So for me, it was also a surprise to see how the tentative title changed finally, because with architecture and politics seems everything more clearly. And as Professor has said, the connection with the left wings and all the rising of the extreme right is something which must be put in the center of the discussion of the pavilion, the ideology behind the commissioners. And I think that what in fact is another accidental circumstance of the making of the book, the changing of the title, is in fact hidden the most important thing behind the scenes. So the most also epic fact of the necessity of making the pavilion disappear finally because of this economic issue, because they debt so many money to these loans. Yes, how also all the material finally got dismantled and coming back to Germany is the really, for me, tragedy behind this changing title of the final edition. And if these things wouldn't have happened, in fact, we wouldn't be here now talking about this. So making disappear the pavilion is for me the most accidental, circumstance.
The accident
for
which
us.
more helped to the creation of a mind. Huh?
Yes.
What do you think about it? Would you like to elaborate on that?
That's a good point, right, to bring the change of title into this. And I agree, the politics is in a way, the key thing of this newly evolving story that we worked on. So I think you have a very good point. And an interesting, since just to follow up on one thing you mentioned, we found out that the material was shipped back to Germany after the pavilion was dismantled to Hamburg because they had so much debt they needed to try and make some money, and they couldn't sell it here because of customs regulation. They had to bring everything back home. And now a young researcher in the eastern part of Germany found out that the travertine has ended up in a government building in Dresden, in the Landtag, which is the sort of regional government for the area of Saxony. So they have a plaque now in the floor saying this travertine floor is from the Barcelona Pavilion. I hope it's true, but it adds another sort of wrinkle to this whole story of politics and architecture, because it's a political government building that was built in the 1930s. So it's really quite interesting, you know, and almost resembles that little fictitious story that Rem Koolhaas made up when he said, this is a fiction, I'm going to write a fictional story about it. And he also had similar events happen in his fiction, and now we learn that it ended up in a building in the 1930s in Dresden.
Yeah, actually, sorry, just to point out on that, last year, there was an exhibition in Aachen, in Aquisgrán, there's a Mies cultural center. So they tried to gather together original pieces of the Barcelona Pavilion. So they asked us, and we did send them one of the foundations we have, one of the pieces, the original pieces we found, they were found when the reconstruction was settled. So we sent them one of those. Also, they got some pieces of the floor of that building, and I don't remember what else. So they are kind of organizing a reliquia thing in Aquisgrán with the pieces together, no? Like the original ones. It's never-ending stories about the myth of the building. But sorry, David, because I guided you.
No, I wanted to say that I will speak in Spanish. Que me he sorprendido mucho de lo político que fue, o la cantidad de política detrás del edificio. Es increíble el capítulo que Dietrich investigó mucho más sobre la política alrededor del edificio, ¿no? Es un edificio muy político. Creo que esto es una de las aportaciones que tiene la publicación. Y también creo que, como hay política en todas partes, nosotros de alguna forma sufrimos esta política porque primero se presentó el libro, como decíamos, en otra editorial, y funcionó como un artículo, como cuando presentas un artículo científico. Recibimos 2 informes, que está bien, el editor pidió 2 informes acerca de la calidad del manuscrito nuestro. Y el primero era más bien positivo, con algunas observaciones críticas, y el segundo era muy negativo. Y yo creo, no lo he hablado con Dietrich, pero que era una persona que no le interesaba que se publicara el libro. Eso es lo que yo pienso. Pero gracias a eso, la editora nos pidió incorporar un capítulo extra acerca de la reconstrucción. Y nos dijo, sería bueno que el libro abarcara no solo como lo teníamos nosotros en ese momento, hace años, hasta el 32 o 33, pienso, hasta el 33 justamente, sino que también incluyamos la reconstrucción, así es una monografía mucho más extensa. Y fue muy buena idea. Y fue gracias, digamos, a esta como segundo informe tan lapidario, y con muchas cosas que no coincidíamos y que nos sorprendió. I'm talking about the reports of the first manuscript, because we wanted to work until 1933, I think. And then the editor in Princeton wanted to include another chapter with the reconstruction. It was good, a good idea. The book is better now, but I think there is also a little bit of politics there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course, the story of how the reconstruction came about is also very politically charged,
Yeah,
right?
of
So
course.
Bohigas publishes the first report on having contacted Mies in the 50s in a magazine, which is a fascist magazine, Destino, right? So we're still under Franco. So he starts that whole thing, and then it doesn't happen out of a number of reasons. I think mostly because Mies wanted a lot of money, but it didn't happen. And then when it happens, it's of course because there's this very active mayor who wants to put Barcelona on the map as a tourist destination, which it wasn't at the time. And he was more successful than perhaps many of us think he should have been, because now it's such a magnet, right? But putting Gaudí on the UNESCO World Heritage List, getting the Olympics here, all kinds of things he did, so all that mayor. And he was behind supporting Bohigas and, of course, your father and others to rebuild the pavilion. And I think it's also driven by political ambitions at that moment. Yes, very good. We found, just one little anecdote, the table that was in front of this wall has surfaced in a gallery in New York by Ronald Lauder, who purchased it, and Mies designed it. And this was a table that sat there with the golden book for every visitor at the opening to sign the name. And Mies had designed it very quickly, and it looked like the Barcelona chairs. It had diagonal legs, which is not very good and not very stable, so it was very wobbly, and it still is very wobbly. So I think it's good that they pushed it against the wall so that the King and Queen of Spain could sign, comfortably. And we hope that when we do the flags, we might get it from New York and could show the original tape.
Yeah, have you able to see it? Because I knew it from you just before the pandemics, and it's in New York. I don't know if you've been able to go and see it.
No, I've just talked to the curator, and she said it's so wobbly, we don't know if we can send it, and but meaning it's very shaky, it's not very well designed, and it was a one piece, So.
Yeah, we would really like to at least to have the plans, or to have some technical information about it, and we knew that it's coming back. And also that table had an amazing story because it traveled back to Germany. It was sold or gifted to some friends of Mies van der Rohe and Lilyrijk, and then the table had to leave the country with all the furniture of the family because it was a Jewish family, so it went to Switzerland, I think, and then to the Netherlands, and then finally to Australia, and it has been kept in a family until someone else died, so the table became to be something valuable that the heirs sold to these galleries. So maybe the chairs will also appear one day. The original chairs, maybe they are at someone, a house, and maybe one day it comes back. Although we are a bit worried about bringing the original table here, because none of this is original, as you know, so we don't have to, we curate it, but it's not that dangerous if something happened. But that would be a historical piece. We have to really check that, that we were very happy to know that the table appeared back. It's super exciting. I don't know if there's anyone else in the room who would like to put a question.
That I just wanted to say that in my not so short experience now, Professor Dietrich Neumann is quite open and generous with many people. But I think that he is fully aware of the fact that that is one of the necessary things to promote knowledge. You are not the only one in the club. I do not want to disappoint you. Thanks anyway, Dietrich.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you.
Briefly, to say something about our relationship with Dietrich in Spanish. Then Miriam can translate for you. Because I'm very grateful. Sobre cómo empezó el proyecto, ¿verdad? Porque encontré yo unas cuantas fotografías, bastantes, hacia el año 2010, hace mucho tiempo, y había una amiga, Mariana, que había trabajado con Dietrich, y pensé en escribirle. Obviamente no nos conocíamos. Me da un poco de vergüenza explicar esto porque es muy de cocina, pero creo que si no es ahora, son cosas que no se explican. Y le dije, ¿podrías por favor avisar al profesor Dietrich que le voy a escribir? Pensando que me responda, ¿no? Porque ahora envías un correo y le escribí, encontré un poco de material que me parece que es bastante valioso, me podría recomendar qué hacer, una revista. Me respondió muy rápidamente y me dijo, oh, muchas gracias, por supuesto, envíame lo que tienes. Ostras, por supuesto, o sea, no se me había ocurrido que quería ver. Y yo pensé, bueno, si le envío esto, puede hacer lo que quiera, ¿no? Yo no soy nadie. Puede publicarlo donde quiera. Le escribí a mi amiga de nuevo y le dije, naturalmente me está pidiendo ver, ¿es confiable o no? Dice, mira, oye, la verdad es que si tú quieres algo tienes que enviárselo, no tienes más escapatoria, ¿no? Entonces le envié las cosas y me dijo, esto es bastante serio, te propongo que hagamos algo juntos. Entonces creo que es de una generosidad enorme, ¿no? De parte de él, haberme incluido en el fondo en pensar en una investigación conjunta. Por lo tanto, también es una cosa que quería decir como agradeciéndole a Dietrich. Yo creo que después va a entenderlo mejor cuando se lo expliquen, ¿no? Estaba más cómodo contándolo de esta manera y también tenía la necesidad de decirlo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti también. Thank you, you too, David, for sharing this. It's great that you have all been able to cooperate, and you have both of you being so generous and brave also. And so we thank you for this book. I don't know, Dietrich, if you would like to close with some words.
I'm just very grateful for this collaboration and the fun we had along the way. And it took much longer than we thought when we met in that little plaza downtown. But I'm glad we are here and we see it in reality, and we've accomplished what we set out to do. And now we have to think about the next book we'll do together. So.
That's super. Well, then, thank you everyone. I hope you all enjoy reading the book like we did. Thank you.
Thank you.